All right, welcome everyone to the OWF Wallet Interop Special Interest Group for February 19th, 2025. Today on the agenda, we will hear about the Swiss EID Technology Stack and Interoperability, a presentation from Michel Sahli. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Really looking forward to your presentation. We are, of course, recording the call today. It will be posted right here on the meeting page later today. We are following the Linux Foundation antitrust policy and the Open Wallet Foundation Code of Conduct. Let's see, looking ahead to next week on Wednesday, we will have a presentation on test suites for digital identity standards from Patrick St. Louis. So please stay tuned and join us for that as well. Let's see. Are there any announcements or introductions that anybody would like to make before we jump into the call? Let's see, a few announcements related to some conferences that are coming up soon. DICE, beginning of March in Geneva, IAW in April in Mountain View, and then make sure to sign up for the OWF newsletter if you haven't already. And let's see, in terms of project updates, in Akapai, we had a great presentation on the Hedera non-creds plugin. I also see Stephen, if you want to jump in and give more updates, feel free.
Sean and I were delayed at the TAC meeting. We had it took right to the last minute to get things completed there. Akapai, a couple of things. The Hedera plugin is now available. Really nice work done and a great presentation the other day. Hedera with and on creds via Akapai can now be used. So you can root credentials issued in the Hedera blockchain, which is pretty amazing. Great work done by the foundation and by the DSR team that created it. Second is that we were very successful in deprecating the core AIP1 connections protocol. So this is the first protocol that we've removed from core and changed into plugins. And so that has happened over the last couple of weeks where, as I say, the protocol was removed from the core of Akapai, was added as a plugin. And by just changing the startup parameters, anyone who's still reliant on that protocol can still use it. And we demonstrated that and used the agent test harness that we have to show that all of the tests failed, or a large number of the tests failed. The connections tests failed without with the new code, but as soon as we tweaked the startup parameters, just simply changed how Akapai was invoked, all the tests passed again. So a good demonstration there. We will be doing the same for the version 1 deprecated issue credential and present proof calls as well. So those are changing. Other than that, work continues on the WebVH work. We've now had a full demonstration of all of the capabilities that we've used Indy, for example, and now can use Checked, and now can use Hedera with did WebVH. So that work is there. We can publish DIDs, use them for and on creds. We can use them for other types of credentials. So pleased with that progress as well. So that's the stuff that's been going on in Akapai.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Let's see, any Credo updates?
No, I don't see anyone here on that, so.
All right. How about Fivefold, Owl? Anybody else have?
Not a lot. As I say, for Owl, we make use of it as part of the as part of the experimentation with updating Akapi. It worked really well, continues to flow, and we're also cleaning up some of the other tests that hadn't been passing recently, just for various other tweaks in the or adjustments in the implementations.
Awesome.
Work continues. I know in Credo they did a new release. Bifold has continued to follow up behind Credo as making sure making use of those capabilities.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the release number.
Okay, awesome.
I'll call out that VCX as of like 5 minutes ago
Yeah.
has been confirmed to be moving to the Open Wallet Foundation. So that is exciting and lots of work ahead to make it an awesome project here.
Awesome, great to hear. All right, any other project updates or announcements? Sean, I don't know if you have additional announcements. We went over these super briefly.
Yeah, I
but
was gonna
feel free to
mention
jump in with more.
I was gonna mention VCX, but James stole my thunder. I mean his thunder. He stole Congratulations
His own
to that
thunder.
team. His own thunder. Congratulations to that team. Awesome news.
Yeah, super exciting.
So those not aware, Aries VCX is a Rust implementation similar to Akapi and Credo, but all based on Rust. A collection of crates that implement many of the same capabilities. And of course, that gives you the ability to use all of those in a native application on mobile. So powerful capabilities with a long high quality history of the code base. It goes back all the way to the early days of Indy.
Yeah, super exciting. Congrats to that team. Let's see, want to make sure we have plenty of time for the presentation and discussion. Unless there are any other announcements or project updates or introductions, I think we will go ahead and pass it over to Michel. All right, I'll give you the screen share.
Yeah, just check if it works. You should see something.
Yes,
We do. Nice.
Perfect. So, hi everyone, my name is Michel. I'm from the Swiss EID team. And today I will give you a quick overlook over what we are doing right now, how we are going with interoperability, what's our strategy there, and we will have a longer time for question and answer. So I suggest if you have a question that pops up, just write it in the chat and then we will have the time to answer it later. So before we start, maybe one, I cannot go further. Yes, I can. Okay. I will start with SWIU actually. That's the name of our wallet. So that's brand new. That's start of this year. And that's something that we see a lot because that's part of the branding of the overall infrastructure. So SWIU means first Switzerland, then identity, innovation, and I for the I in the middle. And for the U, it's U and United. So that's just because in the future you will see that a lot. So remember that one. Going further with some cultural things, the EID is or will be optional in Switzerland. That's the same thing that is already the case with the ID card that we have. So you don't need to have it on you all the time. So it will be exactly the same for the EID. And our goal is also pretty much similar to all the other ones doing their EIDs. It's we want privacy by design. We want to have the ID on the smartphone. We also want to achieve unlinkability where it makes sense, data minimization, of course, and the user should have the control over it. If we check the Swiss trust infrastructure, so that's something that a lot of people know, like issuer, holder, and verifier. But the one thing that is very special here is the registries in Switzerland. We'll come in that in a moment. But what's also very interesting in that picture is that you see the components that we will deliver open source so that everyone can check them out, also use them themselves. I have a list just a bit later in the presentation where you can see everything. But you can see that we have the issuer that will be open source, the wallet, SWI, a checker app that will come later, verifier, and then the two registries. And here becomes something, and there is something that is special to Switzerland, I would say. So we have two registries actually. We have the base registry, which manages the technical trust, and we have the trust registry, which manages the or stores the human trust. So in one side we have the base registry, which stores the DIT docs of the DIT web VH, and on the other side we have the trust registry, which stores the trust statements. I will come to that when I will talk about the trust protocol. But there you can check if one of the DITs of the base registry is owned by a verified identity, and if that identity is also a legitimate issuer or a verifier. A bit about the roadmap, that could also be interesting to see where we are at. So in 2021, we had, or maybe starting with how the Swiss political ecosystem is working. In Switzerland, when you do a law, after the law passes the parliament, you have 100 days or up to 100 days to collect 50,000 signatures, so the population, if you're against it. So that, and then if you have your 50,000 votes, you can vote if you want the law or not. So that is what happened in 2021, where they wanted to create an EID which was centralized and owned by the private sector, which the Swiss population voted no. And just after the vote, a few days later, they started a new one where the government should own the EID. And you see now 4 years have passed. We have slowly started. We're slowly finishing with the new law. We are right now in the referendum phase for the new law that was written. And we will also have the new test phase that will start this quarter. And then you can expect in 2026 to have the EID Act that will enter into force and also have the go live or the go into production of our EID. And then still you have some time in 2027 and later where the EID will still evolve and the specification will also evolve to achieve that interoperability, which will not be the case, of course, in 2026. That, of course, you cannot do it alone because we are not only doing a wallet, but the whole infrastructure. That's why on the Swiss EID team, we work with a bit over 80 people. Not since 2021, but slowly over time, it grew to 80 people. And since start of this year, we also selected the technologies that we want to use for 2026. And there you have the first one selected as the one for 2026. So we have DID Web VH for the identifier, OpenID for VCI and VP for the communication protocol, SD.VC for the credential format with ECDSA, and the token status list. Trust protocol is a Swiss custom one, trust protocol based on VC. I will show it a bit later. And there's also a very high chance that the VC appearance in the wallet will be possible with OCA. And I mean, the specifications are not enough so that you can bring interoperability if someone wants to be part of the Swiss ecosystem, because you don't know which draft I'm referring to. If I'm talking about OpenID for VCI, for example, you don't know which option we support and what has to be a must in our ecosystem, but maybe a may in another. So that's why you also have the Swiss profile. It's like the hype document that you see in the U, which just defines which options have to be supported. And that one will also evolve in 2025. So for now, it only supports what is really supported in the open source components. And it will evolve with more option over the course of the year with all the new stuff that will be supported by our implementations. Speaking of that, I just missed one thing here to say. It's the public beta. Public beta is essentially the test Swiss trust infrastructure, where everyone can try out to get what we call a beta idea. So nothing official, it's just an idea that you can get, and then you can try out your use cases, you can bind to the ecosystem and see if it works for you or not. So it's really to try out use cases, see if the integration works with your infrastructure, and so on and so on. And that is also why we open source the repositories for the following components, so that people can either try to be part of the Swiss public beta ecosystem, or as you see, we also open source the base registry and the status registry, so they could actually also create their own registries and start their own ecosystem if they want to try out something, some more stuff. We also have a DIT toolbox, a DIT resolver, the wallets, of course, and also issue and verifier agent that you can get over the QR code or over the link to our GitHub repository. So I will now go to the trust protocol. There is a reason why we choose to go with an initial custom specification, and that's maybe also important about how the strategy over interoperability works, because middle to long term, we for sure want to go with a global specification, something that also other people uses, so that at least technically you can work together, and maybe then it's just a question about regulations and agreements between people. But the thing was that we had two initial candidates. We checked for X509 and for OpenID Federation. And I mean, both bind the identity to a public key, which I will come to that. It's not exactly what we wanted, but X509 was a bit too difficult to adapt to our Swiss needs. And the OpenID Federation was very extensive, so we can do really a lot with it. You have constraints, you have policies, you have entity metadata, you have really a lot that you can do with that. But the only thing that we found that we needed were actually the trust marks. And the trust marks are trusted tokens that are signed by an entity that you trust and give a statement about someone. So we were heavily inspired by the OpenID Federation trust marks, because that was essentially, it had a lot that we needed, and a lot was done right there. The only things that we had a bit of a pain with was some API were not available that we wanted. The status of a trust mark had to be checked at a trust anchor, so on the top. So that means that the trust anchor could monitor essentially if you do requests there. We didn't want it that. We wanted to have more the approach that you have a token that the verified issuer can keep at their place, and then directly share it with the holder with some revocation mechanism, so that the trust register or the trust anchor doesn't know that they are using or checking exactly that identity, for example. And if we wanted to use OpenID Federation, we also would have to define the structure of specific trust marks, because in the specification it was written additional claims may be defined. And no example with DITs, and only with HTTPS. So we thought we will take a short-term solution, which is the Swiss trust statements, and we reused our STJ issuer essentially to create what we call trust statements. So statements that the entity that you trust makes over a DIT. So not a public key, but really a DIT. And then you can say, for example, that's an identity that is bound to that DIT, and it is company A or company B or whatever. The disadvantages that we have currently is that we don't have a delegation mechanism yet for that. And of course, it's not globally accepted because it's something we did on our own. I will come to that because that's a perfect example for later how we go further in interoperability, but I will let that here for now. That is the content that I talked about in trust statements, so that you could have verified identities, who they claim to be, if they're legitimate issuers or legitimate verifier. And now comes a very interesting part. We also we have to have some sort of governance over trust, and the Swiss Confederation will take the part where it will verify the identity of all the actors in the ecosystem. But it doesn't need to tell about or doesn't need to tell who is a legitimate issuer or verifier if the use case is not from the public sector, which means that you could have additional, here it's really just an example, but it could be that then a university network has its own trust registry where it notes who is a legitimate issuer or verifier for those credentials, which are university specific, or it is under the governance of the universities themselves. In the first part, even the trust registry, the third-party trust registry will link back to DITs that are in the base registry. So for now, every DIT that you are using is centralized in the base registry from the Swiss Confederation, which can be a bit weird for a few of you people, because I mean, decentralized identifier, right? But we still centralize it. And essentially the argument for that we went with DITs, especially WebVH, was that we wanted something where if you are like a private sector issuer, you can give your DIT-doc document, you can update it, you can host it by the government, but the government cannot modify it. We cannot modify anything about the DIT-doc or whatever. It's really in the responsibility of the actors from the private sector or who manages those DITs and DIT-docs. And also with the hope that the migration, if we switch from one DIT method to another, if the case will be needed, that it will be easier because we already use DITs. And yeah, I talked about that. And if we think a bit about interoperability and evolution of specification, the specification I showed you are really for the first implementation in 2026. Then starts the work with how do we make that internationally interoperable. And there we have multiple options for the strategy. Because we could either migrate our specification to a standard development organization. If, for example, it doesn't exist yet, that, for example, would be, it isn't published yet, but we worked internally on a backup format for the wallets. And it's a bit of a wink to the people that were at IIW, I think in October or November 22 or 23, where Sam asked if we wanted to do like a format for backups. And that backup that will be published is heavily inspired by the talk that we had like 2 or 3 years ago. But we also have other possibility. For example, we can adapt our components to be globally accepted. That's, for example, that would be possible with, for example, our trust statement or trust protocol that I showed just before, because I mean it's so similar. And we also talked with the author of OpenID Federation, and I'm sure that in the next step we could find some way to just make a transition. If, for example, we could add statuses to the trust marks, or just adapt a few things so that essentially what we were doing is compatible with OpenID Federation. That could be a way to go to international interoperability. And then also, of course, we can invest resources to help in working groups with specification that where we see a potential that they could be used. And otherwise, you can also just switch your components with the specification that won the market adoption in the future. And that's basically it. We have a lot of time for Q&A, and if you want more information about the Swiss CID, you can go on e-id.ch, and you will find most of the information if you want to go more into details.
I've put my hand up, Michel. I do have a question. It's been fascinating to see the evolution and the examples you've given and some of the issues you've been resolving. I just wanted to ask about public awareness of the program and anticipation and use cases. How conscious of the population about what's coming and what's their level of interest and appetite and confidence about it?
That's a really good point. I would say that when it started, at the start, it was really only the technical people that were involved, those that were really interested in it. But it slowly grew over now, I would say for us over last year, especially because we did what we call participation meetings, which are meetings that we do every month where we just show news, how it evolves, and what is happening on the legal side, what is happening on the technical side, or if some private people or foundation or groups want to do a presentation about something they tried out, or something that has that is in common with the EID. And right now we get a bit of publicity with the referendum, of course, but the idea of public, in combination with public backlog, the idea is to start campaigns like informational campaigns all over 2025 to inform the people that it exists, what you can do with it, why it's a good move for privacy and it's not a big brother move or whatever. We are not here for monitoring you, blah, blah, blah. And that would essentially take over 2025 before the EID will come in 2026.
That's great. Could I, if I be a bit cheeky and ask 2 more questions?
Sure.
The first one is, throughout this process, have you identified what the golden credentials are, the verified credentials that issuers have that will unlock a seamless economy or improve productivity or increase levels of trust? What are the top 5, top 10? And for the use cases, let's put it broadly as getting through the front door. But I'm also interested in what helps operational day-to-day services, because many people, many citizens interact with services on an ongoing basis. It's not just proving I'm eligible or proving who I am. It's about continual compliance and ongoing operational work. Has there been any investigation into those operational use cases past the front door? And have you worked out what the pool of attributes and issuers are that are the most important for successful adoption? Sorry, it's a long question.
So no, don't worry, I wrote it down. Let's start with the use cases. That's really a hard one, especially because everyone is searching for use cases. But
Yeah.
I would say one thing that really worked well was to check if in your physical wallet and check what you have in it. And mostly those are the use cases that most people would take for adoption or would find really useful. So in our case, that would mean the EID, the driving license, especially, and then I don't know the other ones, but I mean the health card could be one too. And then yeah, I mean I don't have all the use cases in my head, and I think the main one are really the driving license and the EID. But then I think yeah, with more creativity, maybe we will find something. But I mean, that's what all the people are struggling, right, with use cases.
Yes. I mean, wherever I go and the work we're doing in the UK and keeping an eye on Europe, most of the use cases are anti-money laundering, KYC, know your employee, increasingly know your business authority as a delegated person, and ongoing compliance for one thing or another, particularly in regulated sectors where qualifications, proof of experience, training, etc., are most important. The area we've spent the last 17 years on is about removing the friction, effort, risk, and cost in day-to-day life, public services, transactional relationships between yourself and your service providers. And there's just so many of those for improvement. But it seems we're stuck at the front door as if the foundation has to be that. And I just wonder what your thoughts on that are, because what we found is all of the service providers that have enduring relationships with people know an awful lot about them and can actually be a source of credential issuance, which can unlock improvements in productivity and operational services and build trust from the ground up to generate the electronic identity. So it might be an alternative adoption model, which is the one we've been working through, but they're going to come together.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, in our case, it's really optimization on the government, on the public sector.
Yeah.
For example, we have one case where you want your I don't know how to say it in English. The one the criminal record, exactly. Because in Switzerland we don't really had a digital ID until we finish with that one, with the EID, which means that if you wanted a criminal record, you could start by entering your data on a website, but then you had to download the PDF, sign the PDF, and then with a copy of your ID, and then send it per post. So not really elegant, and they have like 3,000 letters they have to manage each day at the Federal Office of Justice with all these criminal records. Which means that just there, if you can do it in an automated way with the EID, you gain so much more productivity just there.
Yeah. I
So
see lots of hands up, and I'm feeling the heat of other people's desire to speak. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know whose hand was up next, and I'll leave Steve.
I think I'm there.
Okay.
I've got a couple of quick ones. Good questions, David. Thank you. I'm going to ask two quick ones, and then I'll go to the back of the line again because I have a longer one. First, you mentioned early on that you were at the referendum phase. Does that mean that a repeat of 2021 could happen again on this EID law?
yeah, that could happen.
Really?
I mean, that's that's a constitutional right of a Swiss citizen, which means that if you're not happy with what the government is doing, you can say no.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is that well? I'll just leave it at that. And that's more out of curiosity. No, the bigger. Let me go to a technical one. For the SD JOTs, are you going to use batch issuance?
We're currently investigating it, but we want for sure use or have something to achieve unlinkability.
Okay. All right. I've got a more complicated one, but I'm going to let Stavros and Shar go first, and then I'll put my hand up again.
Who was first? I didn't check.
Stavros.
Was it me? So thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, all these questions are very interesting. So if you keep making them, you make our life easier because we also get the answers. Michel, thank you for all these details you shared. I didn't follow well. What did you say about the trust marks and what your plan is? And you mentioned that you already follow something that exists. Is it a standard or a specification about trust marks that exists and you are following?
No, that was actually. Let me get back to that. What I was talking here was essentially the options we have, because we don't want to be stuck with Swiss only specification. And
I think that is the previous one that speaks about the trust marks.
Those ones, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. The point we had is really that we wanted to have like some way to add revocation information in it, because if you have like the trust mark that you can get from OpenID Federation, you have to go back to the trust anchor to check its status. And that's a bit problematic because we wanted to take the, let's say, verifiable credential approach, where you essentially get something from the issuer or the verifier, and then you check the status on it on a large status list or something where nobody from the registries can see what you're actually searching for, and have a better or have more unobservability, if you want so. That was the bigger point. And as I said, it's so similar that I could think that in the future that we could create like a few, or we can suggest adjustments to the OpenID Federation specification and create maybe a profile that would suit us and maybe make us compatible with other people that would also use OpenID Federation. I'm not sure if I answered your question, actually.
No. You answered because I made a completely wrong link when you mentioned trust marks. Now it's really clear. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do I have another one or?
No.
Huh? Shar?
Shar goes next.
Yeah, super interesting presentation, Michelle. Really cool to hear about the Trustmark protocol. This is more a question for the group as a whole. Is there interest among those present in having your tech stack be compliant with the Swiss EID and trust infrastructure interoperability profile, or does it already? Yeah, kind of an open question to the group. Yes, from Ira.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question again? I missed something in there.
Oh yeah, I'm just curious among this group, among those present, is there interest in having your tech stack be compliant with the interoperability profile described here? So implementing SDJOTs with DIDs for issuer binding and complying with whole or parts of the profile, or does your stack already comply?
I'm not really sure if any stack could be compliant with what we are doing because it's a bit special or specific, I would say.
I think there's a really interesting part of that question in terms of the OWF is interoperability, and we're in the interoperability SIG, it's the interoperability across ecosystems that could be a very powerful part of the architecture, reference architecture, and from an interoperability perspective, that ability to understand the ecosystem you're entering and working out how to conform with those rules would be a very useful endeavor, I think, at an OWF level with a project. Just thinking about that core problem set, and the trust registries model, I'm a very big fan of if they can be federated, so that we don't end up with a single point of failure. But so that from an interoperability perspective, Stephen, I wonder if that's a theme we could develop.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on this one. The way that we've got a profile defined, even if you're not, even if you're doing different things, it is worth, if you're using similar technologies to draw up your own profile and see how close it comes. And maybe that is the driver of what this group ought to be doing, which is enable others to articulate what their profile is as nicely as the team here has done, the Swiss EID team has done. And so you can see what you're doing, see how you compare to others, but also maybe make adjustments because, wow, if I can go along with how others are doing it, that's going to build the interoperability across borders, which is exactly what the Swiss EID team is looking for. I'll leave it there. Alexander?
Thank you. You had one slide with 4 types of credentials in the wallet. Yes, the one before.
Which one? That one, yeah.
This one. I'm a bit curious because, well, I'm from a university, and especially within universities, interoperability is one of the key elements where mobility of employees and students of universities within or between universities is one of the key elements, and therefore, especially in the European context of Erasmus and so, how did you plan to integrate that into it? And the other thing is that universities are normally a federated space, so you don't need a central trust anchor for that normally.
That's 2 good questions because I have a good eye, but I would just say that's why I wrote example on the top, on the bottom right. It's essentially just an example that looks good. But yeah, totally. I mean, university networks, you have the whole federated system with EduGain, with Géant, that is already federated to a point. I don't know how it would look like here. It was just to give a good example so that people can understand it. But yeah, you're totally true. Here it would be way more complex if we wanted to do it with universities.
Yes. Thank you.
Daryl?
Great job, Michel. I was actually going to ask a different question, but I think the question was just raised as a really, really good example of how Switzerland is focusing in, and we were at the launch of the Swiss EID SWIU program in December, but Switzerland is doing, I think, what I look at as the right approach, in that you're focusing on what are the government needs, for both the federation as well as the cantons and municipals, but you're also enabling, especially the inside Switzerland. And this screenshot you're showing here, where you have, driver permit clearly issued by government, the student ID, that's clearly, as the last I will say caller indicated, it is a regulated thing, but it's not part of government. Loyalty card is very much more about business, and businesses inside Switzerland want to know, how do they just start to use this thing? The linkages that you're creating, and to Stephen's point, the stating of a profile. You're the first government to that I've seen to make a hard statement over, this is what we're doing. This is where we're not sure what's going to be there long term, but this is what we're doing today. That's going to help a lot of folks say, that is more than good enough for me. So kudos to you and the team for that leadership position.
Thanks a lot. Thierry?
Yes, just a technical question. I've seen, I've been working on protocols and credentials for years, and I know quite well, OpenID for VC. How do you plan to integrate OCA within the protocol? Because OCA is quite large. It's about, VC schema, about rendering, and many things in the OpenID VC are, in issuer metadata, or it's quite different from what is OCA. So what is the plan to integrate OCA within the protocol?
Yeah, so other people know it under OCA, but essentially what we are doing is we will support both, because the whole trust infrastructure is is done in a way to be multi-stack. We want to support multiple specification, because as we talked just before, it's really uncertain where the future will go, so we have to support multiple things. And the idea here is that we just have a priority. So for example, if you have OCA that is available, we go with OCA for the appearance. If you don't have OCA, we go with OpenID, credential issuer, metadata, the display properties, where it also says how it could look like. We also have to think about SDJ-VC, where you also have the display information if you resolve the VCT.
Yeah.
So you have really a lot of sources for appearance information, but the idea that we have is that we do a priority and we do not merge in between them. Because if you start merging the stuff from, let's take that from OCA and then let's take that for the metadata, you will never find out, or that will stop to be deterministic at one point or whatever. We will just focus. If you have that one, we go with that one. If you don't have that one, we go with the next. If you don't have that, we go with the next one. And if you have really nothing, we go with, I think, a fallback that just looks plain.
Yeah, okay. But have you thought to push this option to the working group, to the OpenID for VC working group? Because everything about credential rendering is very poor in the OpenID for VC, so it would be a very good option.
I
totally agree with that. I'll agree with that.
Because I've talked about that to Christina, Torsten, but they don't, they are not focused on that. So, but it's a really good option. And what we have today in OpenID for VC is poor. You cannot do, it's very poor in terms of credential rendering, display rendering.
Totally. I'm also working with Stephen on that issue. We have to converge to one specification, Stephen, at some point, but
exactly. That's what's killing us right now, is just getting it. I'm surprised by the term complicated, because that's the joy of it I see, is it's so simple. But nailing down the details and getting it specified in a simple way and because there's so many competing interests in there, it's been difficult, but I think it is incredibly valuable and simple to use. We've been using it for quite a while in the BC wallet, and it's really nice and very
Maybe
simple.
maybe a bit of
It's also,
context.
sorry for jumping in. It's also independent of really the credential
It
formatting.
is.
Right,
It is
right. It's a
totally
separate
independent.
thing. Putting rendering into a purely ID centric place is kind of odd.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yep.
the OpenID, the SD jock can be supported by it completely right now. It
Yep.
can just point to the work.
100%.
But that also may be the ethos. Our ethos at IRA is we're not doing that work in IRA. We're pointing to things that are already working.
Yeah.
Maybe just a bit of context for everyone. What is going right now in OCA, because Stephen of course knows it, but not everyone. We wanted to use OCA, so we wrote an OCA superset actually, where we added stuff that was not enough for us in the first version of OCA. And right now, the people behind OCA are working to add those parts to the original OCA specification. And Steve and I are heavily commenting that thing they are doing right now.
Yeah.
And the idea would really be that we get a new version of OCA or just adapted version of OCA that we can use, that we use the same one, and then we just create new overlays that are called now community overlays, and then go with that. Because for now, I think we are not compatible with you, Stephen.
I know.
Yeah.
And that's so frustrating because, as I say, it's so simple. We should be, but getting it nailed.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Yep.
Some other last questions?
I think you've done very well. Should let you go.
Yeah,
If I could ask.
Shows the level of interest, I think. So well done.
Yeah, this was awesome. Theory, did you want to go ahead with your question?
yeah, just a question about the issuers, verifiers, and wallet providers. Right now, you plan only the government as the wallet provider, or you see in the future private companies as wallet providers?
Right now, in the last version of the law, they added now the support for third-party wallets. So you can essentially create an Android wallet without any big issue. But if you want to create an iOS wallet, you have some, I would say, lightweight certification to do, because there is an issue with the key attestation that you generate on iOS, because you cannot, it's not very good, or you have to do some stuff that is like glued together, and we have to be sure that it's done in a proper manner. But essentially, you can get certified for the iOS wallet, and the Android wallet is not a big issue, and then you can use it.
Okay, so it means that you accept hardware keys from the smartphones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because we have our law high, which translates to the EU. Now you have to help me.
Substantial.
Yeah, the substantial. Thank you.
Okay, so
Exactly.
so you can use a smartphone as I mean you can use a T or the Strongbox as
The Strongbox. Yeah.
Yes, as a HSM. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. It's great. It's great.
So that was.
I don't have any question related to the presentation, but I want to comment on something David said, so I will keep it for the end. I will let everybody else speak first if they have something to say about the presentation.
James?
Yeah, just on the external wallets, third-party wallets that can be utilized, is there a compliance process that the Swiss government is requiring those wallets to go through in terms of the security and or appropriate use within the tech stack that you've defined, or is it a looser? It is upon the user to determine whether or not they should use XYZ wallet.
In the law, it's written that the Federal Council, so our highest instance, has to approve a wallet, but it's not too over regulated actually. But that is something that we still have to do. So that's not something that you get access right now.
Cool.
Thierry, a last one before Stravas.
Yeah, okay. It was the last the question about the business model. Is there any plan to define a business model for private issuers, verifiers, and the protocol, how to manage, I mean, who pays and how you manage that with the protocols, things like that?
That will surely be for the base registry, so that you can have your DIT on the base registry actually, and surely also for the onboarding for the trust registry. Don't take my word 100%, I'm not totally sure on that, but there is something about the registries that if you want to be identified, it's work that has to be done by the Federal Office of Justice, so that will cost something. And if you want to have your DIT on the base registry, it will also cost something. But it's not about being a neutral zero. That's not the point with that one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
So Stravas, you can know, I think.
Yes, it's a more general comment, and I will echo what David, one of the points David highlighted about what's the killer app, what's the killer use case, because we speak about these digital wallets, and I completely understand that once the technology is there, it will enable use cases to pop up and the industry to innovate and take advantage of the infrastructure and possibilities. However, currently, we need to ask ourselves, what's the killer use case? Because a lot of discussion is about the driving license, but I hardly remember when was the last time I had to present my driving license. And except from my ID card, which I use when I deal with banks and the public sector, it's only the credit card that needs to be on my phone. This is what I use every day, and the problem is already solved. Maybe not in the way we like it or we trust, but it's there. So I guess that this discussion, maybe it is worth it to open so we can identify what is the force or what is that all the citizens will enjoy and they will use every day in their phones.
May I suggest a feature where such passes are actually will be used quite a lot? So if you're thinking about, for example, the student ID, it's the thing that students in exams need to check in and validate who they are, that they are eligible for the exam, or if they have a check-in for the course of the day. That's something. Or if they want to have a student discount in the Mensa or something. So there's a lot of those possible use cases, and students are quite likely to use that technology on a day-to-day basis.
Let's see. Awesome. Thanks, Alexander. Looks like we are just over time. I'm glad we had plenty of time for discussion. I'm sure everybody has to head out, but thank you so much, Michel, for an awesome presentation. Super interesting. Join us next week to hear about test suites from Patrick St. Louis. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Michel, for presenting.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great
Have a
rest
nice
of your day.
day.
Thank you.